Welcome to the fifth year of the nationally recognized award-winning Conversation Series. The program will explore exercise and lifestyle options for keeping your balance physically. I am Richard Breslow, former board chair of the Weinstein Hospice Board of Advisors, having served as marketing chair from 2012 to 2024, and also a former member of the Jewish Home Life Board of Directors. I'm a career healthcare marketer and community volunteer for the Weinstein Hospice, having graduated from Tulane and Northwestern University. Weinstein Hospice is a palliative and end-of-life component of the Jewish Home Life organization centered on aging, which provides care for new age. As the only Jewish not-for-profit hospice in Georgia, we tackle issues of community concern in a series of conversations. We've completed the production of 19 successful Zoom webinars for Weinstein Hospice, all targeted at gathering awareness and promoting conversation among the 45 to 60-year-old population in northern metro Atlanta. Conversations are available for viewing at www.weinsteinhospice.org under the Resources tab. They are also available on our YouTube channel. This one will also reside there after completion. And it's the last one of the season, but we are already beginning to plan for 4 more, November 26th to May 27th. I will now introduce our speaker. Eric Levitan is the founder and CEO of Vivo. Eric brings to Vivo more than 25 years of executive leadership in the technology and software sectors. As he witnessed the decline of his own parents' quality of lives as they got older, he realized he wanted to better understand the aging process and help them. That's why he started Vivo, to create awareness and a safe, engaging, and impactful program to guide older adults to a safer and healthier life. Eric holds a BA in mathematics from Duke University and resides in Sandy Spring with his wife and 2 daughters, and serves as an advisor to tech startups at the Atlanta Tech Village. He serves on the Duke Atlanta Regional Board and is deeply involved in his community. While Eric is speaking, please put your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we should get to most of them. Also, while Eric is speaking, our team at Weinstein Hospice will be randomly selecting one lucky winner for a free eval from Team Vivo, compliments of Eric. Now let's hear from Eric.
Thank you so much, Richard. It is such a joy to be here and talk to you all about something that is very much near and dear to my heart, but also likely really, really important for everyone here listening today as well. And while you may be in midlife, you may be in older life, it's something that we all need to be aware of. And it is the importance of movement, of being intentional and challenging our bodies as we get older, because it is the thing that will promote health span, promote our lifespan, promote our independence, promote our quality of life. And it is such a critical component that is multi-factor impactful as we get older. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. And with that, I'm going to share my screen and really walk you through, at first, a presentation to help give a little bit more insight into the latest around science and exercise, physical activity as we age, to show just how important and amazing this tool that we have at our disposal is to really promote health and independence. And as a part of this presentation, we're actually going to take a dive into not only the science behind what happens to our bodies as we age, but the fact that there is something we can do about it. And we're going to look at what some of those things are. We really want to give you an opportunity to see some real world examples of how we can stay active, even without going to the gym, even without doing things that maybe we're not so comfortable doing. How can we work this into our everyday routine and really start to see meaningful change in our lives? So with that, I always like to start with this quote, which I think really encapsulates everything that we know. It's a quote from a gentleman named Dr. Robert Butler, who was the very first director of the National Institute on Aging. And he said, if exercise could be packaged in a pill, it would be the single most widely prescribed medicine in the world. And nothing could be more true, right? I think we all have a sense that exercise is good for us. But when we really start to think about what that means, I think, especially thinking about exercise as medicine, the most natural question is, well, what's the right dosage to take? What does that mean for me? And how do I incorporate this into my life? And there are these things called the physical activity guidelines that were defined by the CDC about 10 years ago and still are true to this day. And it gives us some guidelines that as we're aging, things that we should be striving to do. And it's really made up of three components: strength training at least 2 days a week, aerobic activity, either 150 minutes per week or of moderate aerobic activity, or 75 minutes a week of vigorous activity. What's the difference between moderate and vigorous, you may be asking? Well, there's a great thing called the talk test. If you can carry on a conversation while you're exercising, it's generally considered moderate. If you're having a hard time maintaining that conversation, that counts as vigorous. One of the interesting things that I do love to share about this guideline is this seems like an intimidating number, right? 150 minutes a week, that's a lot of minutes. A really amazing thing that we now know, you don't have to get those 150 minutes in any organized way. In other words, you can get 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 15 minutes there, and they all add up cumulatively to this 150 minutes. It doesn't need to be in 30-minute bouts or 45-minute bouts or 60-minute sessions. It all adds up and it all counts. So I want to make sure everybody knows that. And then balance activities, balance exercises 3 days a week, and really striving for about 5 minutes of balance in each of these sessions. And we'll learn a little bit more about what that means and what are some examples of this. Well, given those physical activity guidelines, I think you couple that with the fact that, look, as we all age, we all intrinsically know, we experience this ourselves. Things start to get harder as we get older, right? Whether it's carrying a bag of groceries up a flight of stairs or standing up from a chair, and we really notice it when we try to get up off of the floor. Well, I think it's important to understand why that is, because that's going to help us understand how we can combat that. And it all kinds of goes back to this phrase, that this very common expression that we all know, which is use it or lose it. But when we think about that, what are we actually talking about? What do we need to use or we're losing? And the answer is muscle mass. And this is one of my favorite slides to show because I think it gives us a really deep dive of what's happening to our bodies as we get older. And so what you can see here is basically our muscle mass and our strength really peaks in our mid-20s. And then starting in our 30s, yes, our 30s, we start to naturally lose muscle mass as we age. It starts off pretty slowly. We can't really detect it at any significant level, but it starts to accelerate. It is a progressive condition, and it starts somewhere around 3 to 8% per decade, and then doubles into our 60s, 70s, and beyond. And we start losing a significant amount of muscle mass. And it's not just that we're losing muscle mass, it's what's happening within the muscle itself. And so if we look at this image over on the right, these two images, this is the cross section of the human thigh. Imagine if you were to look directly down into your thigh. And this top image is the image of a healthy 20-year-old. And what we see is a thin layer of white around the outside of the leg. That's called subcutaneous fat. That's fat that's around the muscle. This is a good thing. We all have it. You can obviously the bone, the leg bone that you can see here. And then you see all of this really dark matter around it. Well, that dark matter is muscle tissue. It's muscle fibers, or what we refer to as muscle mass. You see a little bit of white kind of speckles, in between here. That's fat, and that's referred to as intramuscular adipose tissue. And there's only a little bit of that you can see, right? It's pretty dense material. Well, if we look at that same picture for a 70-year-old, we see three pretty distinct differences. Difference number one, we see a lot more of that white around the muscle. That is, again, this increase of fat that surrounds the muscle. The second thing we see is the muscle's a lot smaller, right? We see this really, really significant size here, and here it's a lot smaller. And then the third thing that we see is a lot more marbling. It looks like a delicious New York strip, but unfortunately, it is that same intramuscular adipose tissue that is fat that is infiltrating the muscle. And what that translates to is not only are we losing muscle mass, but it's being replaced by fat. And the fat that's inside of this muscle is impeding the performance of how a muscle works. The way a muscle works is the muscle fibers contract and expand to create force. And when fat gets in the way, it doesn't quite contract and expand as well as it used to. And this means not only are we losing muscle mass, we're losing muscle strength. And we're actually losing muscle strength at a greater rate than we're losing mass. And so there's actually a word for this. Um, that word, that combination of loss of muscle mass, loss of muscle strength, and ultimately loss of function is called sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is kind of a fun word to say. It sounds like maybe it's a glamorous island off the coast of Italy. It is not. It is a disease that we all get as we get older. And it's something that we just don't talk enough about. It's becoming more and more a part of the vernacular of physicians as we go see doctors as we're getting older. But this is something that's really important for all of us to know that we are naturally losing muscle mass as we age. And if we don't do anything about it, it will continue to accelerate at a progressive rate and ultimately cause us to lose our independence. So that's a little bit of doom and gloom, but I really felt it's important to understand the science of what's happening to our bodies as we age. And by the way, this happens to all of us, this regardless of gender, regardless of country of origin, regardless of socioeconomic status, we all start losing muscle mass in our 30s, and it's progressive through the rest of our life. But here's the amazing thing that I am here to talk to you all about today is there's actually something we can do about it. We can bend that curve. We can slow that progressive decline. And we have known from decades and decades of research, really since the 1960s and 70s, when there were some really landmark studies around addressing sarcopenia, that no matter what your age, no matter what your fitness level, how much experience you have exercising, whether you haven't exercised in decades, you can challenge your muscles on a regular basis, also known as strength training or resistance training, and you can regain strength at any point and regain bone density and regain function. And that's what we're talking about today. So, to combat sarcopenia, there's actually two things that we need to pay attention to. The first of that is exercise, and we're going to spend the bulk of our time today talking about exercise. But there is another element that I also want to mention so you at least have some foundational information to take away and also think about, which is nutrition. And not just generic nutrition, but nutrition that's really focused on protein. Protein is the building block of muscle. It is what creates that muscle mass. There's a process called muscle protein synthesis where we convert protein into muscle. And if you don't eat enough protein, you're not going to build muscle to respond to this exercise that you're doing. So, and specifically, just to give you a little bit more, it's not just generic protein, it's something called the essential amino acids. They're called the essential amino acids because our body doesn't produce them. We have to consume them through diet. So as we're thinking about protein, we need to be thinking about where do we get these essential amino acids from? And when we think about the current American diet and what we typically eat in a day, this is what it typically looks like. We have, our three meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We usually have maybe a starch, carbohydrate heavy breakfast with a little bit of protein, maybe 10 grams. We have a slightly bigger protein meal for lunch. And then dinner is where we all sit down and we have some large meal with a steak and potatoes and vegetables, et cetera. And we end up having a much more significant meal of protein. Well, in this picture, we're getting about 90 grams of protein in total, but it's distributed. So we have a little bit for breakfast, a little bit more for lunch, and then a lot for dinner. Well, there's something else that happens as we get older. Our bodies become less efficient at converting protein into muscle, and that's called anabolic resistance. And in order to overcome anabolic resistance, we actually have to eat more protein as we get older. And there's a threshold that we can overcome this to really start to create muscle. And that threshold is about 30 grams of protein. And so what we want to do is maximize the number of times we're getting 30 grams of protein in a day. If you look at this distribution of a typical American diet, how many times are we crossing that threshold of 30 grams? Just once, right? For dinner. And that means we're really only producing muscle once per day if your diet looks like this. Well, what if we took that same 90 grams, but rather than really loading up on one of those meals, we distributed evenly across 3 meals? We ate the same amount of protein, but we were really intentional about getting 30 grams for breakfast, 30 grams for lunch, and 30 grams for dinner. Now our bodies are generating muscle mass 3 times a day. This is a really important takeaway that as we think about staying independent, staying healthy, yes, physical activity is a huge component, but nutrition and physical activity, they're really two sides of the same coin. We have to make sure that we're getting enough protein so that we can build that muscle mass. Of course, the most natural question that I always get when we talk about this is, well, what the heck does 30 grams of protein look like? So we have some pictures just to show you it's not unattainable. And generally, breakfast feels like the hardest meal to get that protein in. So here are two wonderful examples of how to get 30 grams of protein into your breakfast diet. Um, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, a really, really high protein source. That's a great way to get that. So a cup of Greek yogurt with some sliced almonds and some raspberries, that's 30 grams of protein. Maybe a breakfast burrito with an egg, egg whites, excuse me, some black beans and some shredded cheese and a whole wheat tortilla. Also 30 grams of protein. All things that we probably could eat if we really thought about it, were intentional. It's not a tremendous amount of food. From a meat perspective, usually 30 grams is about 3 to 4 ounces of lean meat. So, really just want to give you guys some ideas of how to be intentional about getting 30 grams of protein in all of our meals. All right, we're going to leave nutrition, by the way, as a quick kind of case in point. If you've ever had to be on a meal supplement and take a boost or an Ensure, next time you look at that, turn that bottle around, you'll see each one of those little bottles has 30 grams of protein. That's not an accident. That's very much intentional. So we're going to leave nutrition behind and really focus on exercise for the rest of this talk. And I always like to start out with this idea of, when you think about strength training, what are you thinking of? And for a lot of us, it's this picture. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger, shirtless, bulging muscles in a gym, pained look on his face, lifting heavy weight. Yes, this is a form of strength training, but for the purposes of this conversation, this is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is functional movement that we want to get really good at every day. This is what we're talking about. These are 3 exercises that are examples of strength training that we're going to talk about, and we're going to demonstrate a little bit later. I refer to these as the holy trinity of exercise. If you did nothing other than these 3 different movements every single day, you would really maintain your health and your independence significantly. And these 3 exercises are push-ups, squats, and planks. We're going to talk a little bit more and demonstrate how these are adaptable. But what I love is this first picture. This is a woman doing a push-up. And much like that, connotation that we have around strength training, a lot of us have a connotation of a push-up as getting to the floor on your hands and toes, lowering your chest to the floor and pushing yourself away. That's one form of a push-up. And, quite frankly, a lot of us can't do that. We can't comfortably get down to the floor, do a push-up, and get off of the floor. So this is an adaptation. And we're going to talk a lot about this today, is how to adapt movement to work for you. This is a way of doing a push-up off the back of a chair. You can also do a push-up literally standing next to a wall and extending your arms away from the wall. And the more angle you create, the further your feet are away from that wall, the more challenging it gets. But doing a push-up does not require getting on the floor. So why are we trying to do these exercises? Well, what is a push-up mimicking in real life? Well, maybe it's opening a door, right? Pushing something away from you. Maybe if you do need to get up off of the floor, you need the strength to be able to do that. And doing push-ups, practicing that movement, helps you get off of the floor. A really, really important thing is, sometimes falls happen whether we lose our balance or not, right? Maybe we trip over something. We have a dog, we have a pet. There's a curve that we're working on or walking up, and we get distracted. We don't see it. Sometimes we fall regardless of how much we train not to fall. But catching ourselves on a fall is really, really critical part of learning to fall. And doing this movement really helps prevent injuries because we can catch ourselves when we do fall. This middle movement, a squat, again, we'll see how we can adapt this regardless of what your lower body strength looks like, what your mobility looks like, how good your knees are, how much they creak or how much they hurt. But this is arguably the most fundamental movement that we all need to get really comfortable doing. A squat is standing up and sitting down from a chair or a commode, something we do dozens of times a day. When we lose our ability to stand up from a chair, we truly lose our independence. So we should practice this and we should get really good at it. It's also really good for getting out of a car if we need to pick up something off of the ground. All really good reasons to practice that movement. And then a plank. A plank is really focusing on the core muscles around your stomach, around your lower back. Again, this is an example of someone doing a plank on the ground, much like the push up. You could do this off of a wall. You could do this off of a countertop or the back of a chair. We'll see different ways to adapt this in just a little bit. But why do we do this movement? It's really good for our balance. It helps us get out of bed in the morning. It helps support our posture. Often, as we get older, our shoulders start to hunch over, and it's called kyphosis. We want to maintain our strength and our posture that helps keep us upright. So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to let everybody know building strength. Yes, there's some obvious, we're going to be stronger. We're going to be able to lift things and maybe put, a vase up in a cabinet above our head easier than we would otherwise. But it is so much more impactful than just building strength. Did you know that building strength helps with sleep? It helps not just with sleep duration, but sleep quality. And by the way, we can provide this presentation. There's links to all the studies that demonstrate the impact that we're talking about. It also impacts our longevity. There was this great study about 10 years ago in 2016 that showed individuals that did strength training twice a week had 46% lower mortality rates for all-cause mortality. 46%. That's really significant. It also helps with surgery. There's a notion called prehabilitation, where you strength train prior to surgery, and it dramatically improves your ability to recover and reduces that recovery time after surgery. Risk of falls is sort of the obvious one. We talk about this a lot. It's arguably the single most important thing you can do to reduce your risk of a fall. And it also helps with depression, anxiety, and specifically for those of us who are listening who are caregivers, we often ignore our own self-care when we become a caregiver for somebody else. And it's really important to maintain our strength, to maintain our function, and to take care of ourselves. And we see significant reduction in what's called caregiver burden for individuals who are participating in strength training. And perhaps the most important reason, if I haven't already piqued your interest, building strength and physical activity in general is arguably the single greatest defense that we have towards cognitive decline. There are numerous studies that show that engaging in physical activity and specifically strength training helps preserve brain structure and brain size and all that important white and gray matter. It helps with executive function and completing complex tasks. It helps with memory and attention and reasoning. It is a really, really impactful thing for all of us to do. So much so that one of the biggest studies that has ever been done in the US came out just this past summer called the US Pointer Study. If you've not heard of this or if you're not as familiar with it, I definitely recommend everybody go Google the US Pointer Study because it gives a framework for how to not only slow the progression of cognitive decline, but actually to increase cognition. And there's 4 elements of it. We won't talk a lot about it in the interest of time, but know that there's physical activity, physical exercise, there's health monitoring, nutrition, and eating a Mediterranean diet called the Mind diet, and these cognitive exercises, these brain games that we can do that really is a formula for doing everything within reason to delay cognitive decline as much as we can. All right, well, given all those wonderful benefits that we just talked about, the sobering part of this is a lot of us aren't exercising very much. And the most important number on here that I'll point to is less than 10% of Americans over the age of 65 are consistently participating in strength training. Less than 10%. Said differently, more than 90% of us are not doing this on a regular basis. And I think it's important for all of us to understand why, because that will help us think about the fact that we can do this. And here's a list of running a company that's helping older adults to strength train. I get a lot of what we now refer to as the objections every time I talk to someone. You can look at this list for yourself. We won't read them all, but I'm sure you can find things that as you're thinking about, do I currently strength train? And if I don't, why don't I? Some of these are probably on your list of reasons. Maybe you're in too much pain. You think it'll make your pain worse. Maybe you're already walking. You think you don't need to strength train, or there's some fear around getting hurt. These are all very, very common. By the way, my favorite one's not even on this list. It's I don't have time. Um, all of these probably resonate with some of you that are listening today. These are all misconceptions. They feel valid, but they're all really based on elements of fear and shame that we all have because of the way that we've been brought up around exercise and aging, and we're going to get hurt and it's scary and we'll be embarrassed. They're all valid concerns, but know that exercise, actually the exact opposite. The number one prescription for people with arthritic pain is exercise and strength training. Building up the muscles around that joint actually reduces pain. Being afraid of getting hurt, you're much more likely to get hurt if you don't exercise than if you do. It prevents injuries, not encourages injuries. Walking, while probably the single greatest thing that we all should do as much as humanly possible, it's not challenging enough to really build strength. So I just want to help you understand and really translate that into, if this is something that is piquing your interest and you want to figure out how to do on your own, I want to share a couple of quick tips of things to keep in mind, and then we're going to do a couple of demonstrations of exercises. The number one most important thing for you to think about, and actually, let me restate this. I'm going to start with a lower right box around safety, because before you do anything, you always want to talk to a physician, a healthcare professional who knows you, who knows your existing conditions. The worst thing you could do is start to exercise and hurt yourself or worse. And so you always want to understand, given your conditions, whether you have osteopenia, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and some sort of neuropathy. We all have all these things going on with us. Know what your situation is, talk to a physician, and make sure you're engaging safely. That also probably includes engaging an exercise professional who can help make sure that you're doing things that are safe. So we're going to put that to the side. Outside of maintaining your safety, the number one most important thing to know is, in order for exercise and strength training in particular to have all of those benefits we talked about, you have to do it consistently. Exercising occasionally, seldomly, rarely, you're not going to see these benefits. What does consistently mean? From a building strength perspective, you really want to be doing this 2 to 3 times a week and really aligning with those CDC recommendations twice a week, really at minimum. And when you are engaging consistently, it needs to be a little bit challenging. And this is the, part of the discussion that may not be the best message to deliver, but it is the truth. And so I want to make sure you guys know. If exercise is too easy, you're not going to get those outcomes. It's got to be a little bit challenging. You don't want it to be really challenging, because that's where injuries can occur. You want it to be a little bit challenging. And what does a little bit challenging mean? A really good rule of thumb is, if you're doing a number of repetitions, a set of an exercise, maybe arm curls, and you can do somewhere between 8 to 12 repetitions of that movement, and those last couple of repetitions are hard or a little bit challenging, that's the sweet spot for the right level of challenge. If you are using a dumbbell and you're just doing this over and over again and you're smiling, you're not breaking a sweat, and you're cranking out 20, 30, 50, 70 arm curls, it's not challenging enough. And I think a lot of us, when we exercise, we sort of default to that. So again, not the best message to deliver, but I want to make sure you're all aware. It's got to be a little bit challenging to have the impact on us that we want. And by the way, isn't that true for everything in life, right? We need to challenge ourselves emotionally, intellectually, socially. That's how we grow. And it's the exact same thing with muscles, with strength training. It's got to be a little bit challenging. We also want to mix it up. We want to create variation. We don't just want to do the same things every day. The body adapts very quickly. And so we want to continue. Part of that challenge is doing different movements. So all put together, definitely be focused on engaging someone who can help you define how to do this on an ongoing basis. One of the things that we didn't talk about with consistency is, it's easy to say do this 2 to 3 times a week and stay consistent. It's really hard to do. And so I also want to leave you with a couple of thoughts and tips on how to create consistency. Because again, outside of safety, consistency is the single most important thing that we can do. Well, how do we make something a habit? How do we create consistency? It's going to be different for every single person, but there's a couple of common themes. Theme number one, when we schedule something, we tend to be more likely to do it. So if you're going to engage in a strength training program 2 times a week, schedule it, put it in your calendar. Make it predictable because it will just increase the likelihood that you'll do it. And don't just schedule it for 1 week. Create a recurring schedule for yourself so it becomes predictable week after week. Maybe your strength days are going to be Mondays and Thursdays at 10:30 a.m. Pick 2 days and times that work for you and make that your schedule. Because when you make that your schedule, it begins to seep into your DNA of, oh, it's Mondays at 10:30. I'm not going to schedule any appointments. This is my strength day. And you'll be more likely to do it. What's another way to create that consistency? Do it with somebody else who's going to expect you to be there. It's a great way to create accountability for yourself to not do this on your own. Whether it's a spouse or a caregiver or a loved one, really think about ways that you can engage friends, family, other individuals, because sometimes when you wake up and you didn't sleep that well, you're tired, it really helps to know that someone's waiting for you and creates a little bit more of that accountability to stay consistent. The last thing I'll say is probably outside of those two, the other really, really important element is it has to be fun. If it's not fun, you're not going to stay with it. So, how do you make exercise fun? Well, the answer is going to be different from person to person, but here are some very common themes. Certainly, doing it with other people can make it more fun, right? Can make it more social. Maybe you really enjoy being outside, so find ways to exercise outside. Maybe you like music, you want to listen to music while you're exercising. Maybe you want to watch content, watch Netflix or Apple. Maybe you want to do things that are really social, like pickleball or tennis. Find ways to make exercise fun, because if you don't, you're not going to stick with it. Because inevitably, all of these things wane. We need reasons to keep us going because, unfortunately, much like getting to a level of challenge, exercise and strength training is not something you can do for 8 weeks or 12 weeks or even 6 months or a year and check a box and say, I'm done. This is something that you need to do every week for the rest of your life. And you will see the benefits, but creating that habit is really hard. So I want to start to shift the conversation from talking to you about ways that the benefits of strength training, how we can bring this into our lives, and actually talk about real tangible things that we can do. And there's this great expression about that we always put things off and talk about, we're going to do this one day, we're going to do this one day, and we've kind of like to talk about turn one day into day one, make tomorrow day one of you beginning to do these things. So how can we do some of these activities and bake them into just our normal daily routines? Well, some simple things that we've probably all heard before, and then we're going to get into maybe some more advanced things. Taking the stairs, obviously you have to be stable enough to feel comfortable doing that. Taking the stairs is a great way to maintain strength in your legs. Every time you take a step up, we're practicing balance and we're doing something that is challenging our muscles. Often, as we downsize later in life, we tend to remove stairs. And it's a little bit of a complex situation, right? Because we don't want to have a fall, we don't want to be injured. But boy, stairs are a great way to keep us active and keep us challenged. So, thinking about taking the stairs instead of the elevator, an easy way to get a little bit of strength training in there. Parking further away, right? Don't go for that spot that's right up front. Park a little bit further away to get our heart rate up as we walk into a restaurant or wherever we happen to be going. There's a lot of really exciting science around keeping blood sugar at bay. And what we know is 10-minute bouts of walking after eating a meal, or even moving 5 minutes every hour, or doing 10 chair stands every hour. Ways to incorporate things throughout the day have a dramatic impact on lowering hemoglobin A1C, which is that marker for diabetes. So staying active throughout the day, getting up and just standing up and sitting down in your chair every hour, walking around your home for a couple of minutes every hour, easy ways to begin to bake this into what you're doing every day. And then the last thing I want to talk about, and we're going to actually do some demonstrations around this, is a notion called exercise snacking. And this goes back to one of the earlier things we were talking about, where you don't have to get all 150 minutes, right, in a couple of big exercise sessions. You can do them. It all adds up. It all counts. And so here are three, and we're going to actually go through a few more simple things that you can do today. make today day one or tomorrow day one. Things that you can start to do to really start to bring some of this stuff into your lives, to start to improve your balance, to start to improve your strength. And I'm going to demonstrate all of these. So the first one that we're going to look at are seated leg raises, which is this movement over on the left. This is actually the same in that same family of the squat that we looked about earlier, that we talked about earlier. But a lot of people can't do a squat and maybe not can't even do a chair stand. Obviously, if you're able to do those things, those are great ways to challenge yourself. But if you're not able to do that, you can stay seated. You can do this while you're watching TV. You can actually scoot your butt towards the end of a chair. And I'm actually going to demonstrate that right here. And you can
So,
see, oop,
so while
go ahead.
Eric is getting set for his show and tell, go ahead and put your questions in the chat box because we'll have some time for question after.
And you can see I've just moved my rear end towards the end of the chair. And what I can do is just straighten one leg and try to flex it as I straighten it. And there's a really neat technique to know that you're working the right muscles. You can actually touch a muscle, and it's called palpation. And your muscle actually responds to you touching it. You can make sure you're giving it a little flex or giving it a little squeeze. And what you can do, if you're comfortable doing this on your own, you can follow along. If you're not comfortable doing this, by all means, feel free to watch. But for those of you who do feel comfortable, you can feel free to do this with me. But we're going to do 5 repetitions on our right leg. So just 1, we're going to give it a little squeeze, put it back down. 2, same thing. And I'm just touching it to make sure I'm actually squeezing that muscle, that quadricep muscle. That's 3, 4, and 5. And we can do the same thing on our left leg, right? 1, and I can squeeze that muscle at the top. 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is a great way to continue to work that same movement, those same muscles, lower leg muscles that are so important for standing up from a chair. This is a great thing that we can do while we're watching TV, while we're maybe reading in bed at the end of the night. We can go to the edge of our bed and we can do that movement. So, a great way to stay active while we're kind of sitting. Another one, standing on one leg. Standing on one leg is one of the real markers for longevity and independence. It's something that it's really important that we get good at. It's probably the most important thing to keep improving our balance. If we think about what is walking, walking is essentially shifting between standing on one leg from one leg to the other. So we need to be really, really good at this movement. Well, what you're seeing in this picture is a woman standing on one leg and she's holding onto a countertop. And we're going to do this in just a second. But what we want to practice is, can you stand on one leg and let's start to time ourselves? Can we do it for 10 seconds? Can we do it for 20 seconds? Even if we're holding on. And as you think about points of your day where you have an opportunity to do that, there's a great one that makes this really easy to incorporate into your routine. And that's something we do twice a day, in the morning and the evening, which is brushing our teeth. And we can, while we're brushing our teeth, in theory, we're doing that for 2 minutes, right? And or something around that. And what we can do is practice maybe every 20 or 30 seconds, switching between one leg and the other. And how we can start to do that is, I'm just going to back up a little bit. I've got a table here in front of me, or actually, I'm going to use the back of this chair. And what I want to show you is, when we're really, really new to this and we're not feeling very stable, you want to hold on to something stable. Do not use a chair with wheels. We want to use something that doesn't move, maybe a countertop, maybe the back of a chair. And we want to hold on and practice just keeping one leg up. And as you get more comfortable, you can slowly release your hands and even get to a point where you've got one finger. One finger actually can provide a lot of stability. But what we want to do is continue to get more comfortable with this movement and challenge ourselves, and ultimately build up to a point where we can do it without holding on at all. And we always have our chair here or our counter here that if we begin to lose our balance, we can catch ourselves. But doing this while we're brushing our teeth, maybe while we're standing in line at a grocery store, this is a great way to practice our balance. And again, in a perfect world, you get to a point where you can do this 30 seconds on one side and 30 seconds on the other side. And don't be afraid to hold on. Don't be afraid to use those fingers. And don't be afraid to challenge yourself, because this is a great way to, again, continue to leverage something that you're doing every single day to start to practice your balance. Again, one-legged balance, really, really important to practice. Something very, very similar that's not pictured here is called one-legged weight shifting. And I'm going to show you similar movements set up. We're going to get put on on the back of a chair, and it is shifting all of your weight to one side of your body and taking your foot out to the side. And so if everyone can see that, I'm literally just shifting my weight from one side to the other. I'm holding on to this chair, but you want to practice shifting your body weight from one leg to the other. It's another really, really great technique that helps you with balance. It's part of what we do when we're walking is we shift from one side to the other and we put all of our weight. And that's what we want to get good at. We want to avoid that foot shuffling thing that tends to lead to falls. The last of these pictures, and we'll have a few more demonstrations that we'll do, is a really challenging one, but one that I want everyone to think about. And it's called tandem walking. You can see from the picture, it is putting one foot in front of the other foot. This is something that you can do, think about when you're in the grocery store or when you're in walking to your table in the restaurant. It is a lot harder than it looks. So what it's doing is it's narrowing the plane of your balance into something that's very narrow, right? One foot in front of the other. And it's a great way to challenge your balance. You need to make really sure that before you do this, you feel comfortable doing this. And if you don't feel comfortable, and as a good starting point, you can do the same movement, but literally without walking. Do it standing. And you can put one foot in front of the other, much like the setup for the one-legged standing on one leg. Hold onto a counter, hold onto a wall, hold onto the back of a chair, and put one foot in front of the other and see, just like with that one leg balance, can you take your hands off? Can you do it with just a finger? And it's a great thing, much like when you're brushing your teeth, practice just having one foot right in front of the other. Because if you think about what you're doing, normally when we're standing 2 feet side by side, our balance is distributed across that width. When we move it one behind the other, we take that width and we make it much more narrow, which challenges our balance. So it's a wonderful way to also challenge your balance. So here are 3 examples of things that you can literally do throughout the day. While you're watching TV, seated leg raises, while you're brushing your teeth, standing on one leg, maybe while you're grocery shopping, do some tandem walking, or just practicing at home, standing with one foot in front of the other. I wanted to show you a couple of other maybe more complicated examples. This is an example of what we do in this program called Vivo, this company that I run, where we work with older adults in helping build strength. And what I want to show you specifically is how we adapt exercises for people of different functional abilities. And I'm gonna skip the stuff up top, but I'm going to show you this bottom, which is very much in line with what we were just talking about. We practice in Vivo, we practice a single leg balance because it's really important. And how you get better at something is by practicing it. So we have this understanding, or this adaptation of different levels, where a level 1 exercise is going to be supported and a level 4 exercise is going to be the most challenging version of a movement. And you can see how we can take something as straightforward as a single leg hold, balancing on one leg, and we can either hold onto a chair and make it assisted, or we can remove the assistance and just hold it without holding onto anything, to moving our eyes around the room. If you want to try that on your own while you're holding onto something, it's very hard to maintain your balance. And even the most challenging version of that is to do a single leg hold with your eyes closed. It's really, really challenging. And so one very, very simple exercise that you can adapt depending on where you are in this spectrum of your balance, and from holding on to doing it with your eyes closed. So I want you all to kind of take away that every single exercise is adaptable to be made more, straightforward or more challenging. And what you want to do is get really comfortable with a movement before starting to challenge yourself. When in this specific workout that I'm demonstrating, I also wanted to point out 2 other things. One is, we talked about this already, but I wanted to just show you how it's written out. In this particular exercise, we're doing squats, but there are different variations of how you can do a squat. There's a seated either leg extension or knee raise, which we talked about earlier. You can do a chair stand where you sit up or you stand up and sit down in a chair so there's support at the bottom. Or you can do a body weight squat where there's no chair and you have to kind of stop yourself and stand back up. And you can even do that with weight. And so there's ways to adapt every single movement to work for you. If you are chair bound and you can only do seated movements, this is a great way to be able to still continue to work those lower body muscles. The last thing I want to highlight, and then we're going to go to some Q&A, is push-ups. Again, we saw the picture of the woman doing a push-up off the back of a chair. I just want to show you what that looks like, and we can even do it against a wall where I'll show you on the chair. So I can actually move my feet a little bit further away from the chair, and I can lower my chest to the chair and push myself back up. And if I don't have to get to the ground, the further back I move my feet, the more challenging it gets, right? The greater the angle my body's at. I can do the exact same movement against the wall where I can do the same push-up movement. And the further I walk my feet back, the harder it gets. And so there's ways to adapt all of these exercises for where you're at in your level of mobility and your comfort with exercise. And so I just wanted to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to not only get this understanding of the fact that our bodies are losing muscle mass as we age, but the fact that there's something we can do about it. We can and be intentional about our strength training. We hopefully learned a new word today, sarcopenia, the progressive loss of muscle mass as we age. We learned that we can combat that with strength training and nutrition and really targeting 30 grams of protein per meal to overcome that resistance and build muscle. And that all of these exercises are adaptable. And there's ways that we can put them into our daily routine, whether it's standing on one foot or walking immediately in front of each other or doing seated knee extensions. There's lots of ways that we can improve our balance, improve our strength throughout the day, every day. So with that, we have 10 minutes for some Q&A, Richard.
Eric, fantastic job. Thank you so much. I'm sure our audience really appreciated that. Quick question. When you said take the stairs rather than the elevator, does it matter whether it's going up the stairs or going down the stairs?
It doesn't. They both are really effective movements and challenge our bodies. It may matter for your comfort level. And then it also certainly holding onto a railing can give you that extra support if you're feeling less comfortable. But going down the stairs works your muscles a little bit differently than going up. So doing both of them is actually really good.
Okay. Is it ever too late to start strength training?
It is never too late. That's one of the biggest misconceptions is, and it's not even as much of a misconception as it is, I think, a personal mantra that a lot of us have, which is, I can't do that anymore. And so I really, more than anything else, for everyone who's listening, know that it's not too late. And we work with thousands of older adults of every shape and size that comes to us with multiple chronic conditions. And we see improvements across the board all the time. It is really, really incredible. The really landmark studies that were done in the 1980s out of Tufts University looked at people in their 90s in nursing homes who had never exercised and had a lot of frailty. And they saw multiple hundreds% increases in strength and function. And so it is truly never too late.
How can older adults exercise safely if they have arthritis or joint pain at this point in time?
Yeah, this is where consulting a professional will be really, really important because trying to do this on your own without an understanding of joint mechanics is hard. And engaging a certified personal trainer, an exercise physiologist, a physical therapist, really, really good idea because they'll show you how to actually modify an exercise for joint pain that's designed to improve the strength around that joint, which is what starts to relieve that pain.
Do you need weights or equipment to start building strength?
You do not. Body weight is generally sufficient for all of us. As you get stronger, that's where it starts to get more important to increase that level of challenge. So If a chair stand, remember that really important movement of squat. If a chair stand starts to get easier and then you just start to do body weight squats and that gets easier, that's where maybe you want a dumbbell or a kettlebell or something to hold, a wine bottle, something to hold that makes it a little bit more challenging. But generally, we don't need any equipment to get started.
If someone has already fallen, how can they rebuild their confidence? Uh,
Confidence is a huge part of this. One of the things that we measure actually in our program and in the research that we do is there's a scale. It's called the fear of falling scale, and fear of falling is actually the number one indicator towards actually to likelihood of a fall. And because what happens is when we are afraid of falling, we start to shrink our life space. We start to move less and we start to go less places and do less things, which of course only accelerates the loss of muscle mass and increases the likelihood that we're going to fall. So if we've fallen, it's really important to to start doing some level of movement with some level of challenge and get comfortable with that movement and continue that progression. Again, it is not too late. A fall, especially a fall that we recover from, maybe a shot across the bow of in terms of giving us the motivation to get started. So people who have fallen before, this is a great message to hear is now is the time to do something about it. Falls are very, very destructive, and they're the things that end up costing the healthcare system and our own independence more than anything else. And so having a fall, knowing that that's possible, hopefully serves as motivation to get started, but get started slowly. Get started with a professional who can help you and make sure that you're comfortable before you start challenging yourself.
how quickly can someone begin to notice improvements in strength and balance once they start?
So 4 to 8 weeks is where we really start to see significant movement. We actually measure people's progress every 8 weeks, and we do that because we see significant changes. We see changes of about 25% increases in strength and endurance after 2 months of participating in this Vivo program, which is in line with the general outcomes that we see across programming. So it happens pretty fast.
Okay. So I think we've about covered most of the issues from a set of questions, but I want to tell you that while you were speaking, we drew a name from of the people that attended, and one lucky winner is going to get a free eval from Team Vivo, Eric's company. And that lucky winner is Howard Sachs. Congratulations, Howard. Uh, Eric will get in touch with you, and or someone from his company will get in touch with you, and we will begin that evaluation process for you.
Fabulous. Looking forward to
Uh,
it, Howard.
any questions that you have, Eric, that we should be asking but we didn't ask?
Well, there's one pretty common one I get around nutrition, which is, does it make a difference between an animal-based diet and a plant-based diet? And the second question is how effective are protein supplement like shakes that people have make in the morning? And I'll kind of address both of those together. So the short answer is no. You can get sufficient protein from plant-based diet that you can from animal-based diet. It's a little bit easier to get your protein through an animal-based diet. It's more naturally occurring. You need to eat less of it and to be able to digest it. With plant-based diets, you can also get that same amount of protein, but you just have to be a little bit more intentional about where those essential amino acids are coming from. And you need to eat a little bit more because the body does not ingest it quite to the same level that it does with animal protein. And so, absolutely valid. Plant-based versus animal-based, you can always still get your 30 grams of protein per meal. You just have to be a little bit more intentional and knowledgeable if you're going to maintain that plant-based diet. And that actually translates into the protein powders that we see people using is make sure that you know what your protein source is for the protein powder. And specifically, whey-based, which is a more of an animal-based protein, are just a little bit easier to digest. And there was a big expose by Consumer Reports in this past fall where they actually found lead, dangerous amounts of lead, in 20 of the leading plant-based protein powders. And it had to do with using heavy metals and farming of this plant-based protein. And so do some research. go online, find this Consumer Reports article. If you have a plant-based diet and you're interested in some sort of protein powder to supplement your protein, especially at breakfast, which tends to be the hardest time for people to get it, um, make sure you're knowledgeable about what you're getting, because this was pretty shocking to see that a lot of brands of plant-based protein powder had dangerous amounts of lead in them.
Okay. Well, Eric, this has been unbelievably eye-opening for me as well as the rest of the audience, I'm sure. I appreciate your time. And if people have questions, your number was up on the slide and your email, but it's look up Team Vivo and you can find Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you. I
right.
appreciate your time.
All right. Good night.